Good evening. Welcome to CSL Book Shorts. Here we are on the Wednesday before Christmas Eve. And so I'm going to be sharing a Christmas story, two Christmas stories, children's stories with beautiful pictures. And I hope you enjoy. Also included at the end of this message, I have included a special gift to you from CSL. It will be Ellen Hutto singing "Oh Holy Night." So I hope you enjoy that as well. And here we go. So our first book tonight is called The Littlest Magi, a Christmas tale written by Chris Auer, illustrated by Bruce Eagle. "How can anyone so small have so much dirt on him?" laughed the cook's son. It was not easy to be the smallest person in a large palace, but Jacob was. As the smallest and least important of King Herod's servants, it was his job to take the kitchen garbage away in a big cart. It was hard work, but Jacob didn't mind. He was proud to be helping. "After all," he said, "it is the king's garbage." Jacob didn't have any parents or brothers or sisters to look out for him and take care of him. He tried not to think about that, for it made him sad. He wanted more than anything to feel loving arms around him and hear kind words whispered to him as he fell asleep each night. Instead, Jacob was kicked and teased for smelling like old onions and melon rinds. At times, being small was a good thing. Jacob could slip in and out of shadows, climb and hide, crawl and jump, and get to places that no one else could reach. One night he saw a beautiful star. He wanted to see it better, so he climbed to the very top of the very tallest tower of King Herod's palace. When Jacob looked at the star, he didn't feel so sad or small or unwanted. Instead, he felt happy and warm and wonderful. And he couldn't be sure. He wasn't positive, but he thought he heard singing up in the clouds. He couldn't quite catch the words, but the song made his heart beat faster. No one knew the secret hiding places and passages in King Herod's palace better than Jacob. When the cook's son went after him with a stick one afternoon, Jacob slipped into the shadows, ducked down a hallway, climbed a wall, and hid in the rafters above the throne room. Far below him, some men bowed to Herod. "We're looking for the new king," they explained. "We followed his star here." A new king? So that's what the star means, thought Jacob, smiling. "A new king," said Herod. He did not want a new king. After all, wasn't he the king? "Go and search him out," he declared, "and then come back and tell me where he is so I may go and honor him as well." "I will look for him too," Jacob decided. He slipped out of the palace and into the stranger's campsite. He hid himself inside a rolled-up rug and waited. As the strangers prepared to leave, they looked out and wondered what Herod would do. They wondered if they had done the right thing by going to see him. "A king does not like to hear that there is another king," said one. "Especially King Herod," said a second. "Yes, but even a king has to listen when God speaks," said a third. He lifted a rolled-up carpet from the ground. "This gets heavier every time we move it," he grunted as he slung it on the back of a camel. Soon the caravan was underway. From inside the carpet, a pair of eyes watched the palace get smaller and smaller. Jacob fell asleep, full of hopes about the new king. A quick snap sent Jacob flying out of his hiding place and onto the tips of some very elegant shoes. But the wise faces that looked down at him were more amused than angry. "What do we have here?" one of them asked. The wise men shared their dinner with Jacob near the fire. Jacob told them his story, and then they told him their story. Each one of the wise men explained how he had seen the star and set off to follow it many weeks before. "My friends called me foolish," said one. "Mine tried to stop me," said another. "But we didn't have a choice," said the one with the curly beard. The real foolishness is to ignore God's voice. As Jacob looked up at the star, he wondered what God's voice sounded like and if he would ever hear it. The next day, the wise men searched a little village for the new king. "A king here in this dusty place?" laughed some of the people. Jacob did wonder about that, but the wise men kept looking. Then, in a little house on the edge of town, they found him. Jacob blinked back tears of disappointment. "This doesn't look like the house of a king," he thought. Yet his friends knelt in front of the baby and gave him their gifts. The baby's mother, Mary, seemed to know what Jacob was thinking. "God is doing something new," she whispered. "It is time for the world to have a different kind of king. This baby will not look down at you from a palace, but will open the door to a kingdom where everyone is loved and where everyone will live in peace with one another." Jacob wondered how such a thing could be true. "We have found our new king," said one of the wise men. "But now it is time to go home." "How will you return?" asked Joseph, the baby's earthly father. "King Herod is not a man you can trust." "I had a dream," said the one with the gray beard. "The God of Israel warned me not to go back the way we came." Jacob looked down as the others nodded in agreement. He was suddenly sad. "I have to go home too," he said very quietly. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Jacob asked Mary. Jacob held the little baby in his arms. "A new kind of king," he said softly, "and a new kingdom where the great and the small will stand side by side," Mary added. Jacob took Jesus' tiny hand in his own, and for a moment he did not feel quite so small. Jacob slipped back into the palace. For once it was good to be small, for no one even noticed he had been gone. He had a lot to think about now when he took away the garbage in the big cart. "But what I looked for and what I found were very different," he said to the scruffy cat that followed him. "But I'm glad I looked." The cat rubbed against Jacob's leg and purred. "I'm glad I looked because I found something better," he realized. "Imagine a kingdom where even someone like me is important." For now, Jacob still lived in a palace with an angry king. If he closed his eyes, though, he could still feel Joseph and Mary hugging him goodbye. And he could still see the way the baby Jesus smiled at him. There was something about that little family that reminded him of the brightness of the special star, and it somehow made him braver. Jacob needed to be brave, for late one night he heard two soldiers talking about the children in Bethlehem. "There can be only one king in Israel," said the soldier with the cruel face as he sharpened his sword. Jacob was afraid for his friends. He slipped into the shadows, crept over a rooftop, slid down a tree, hurried away from the palace, and ran all the way to Bethlehem. Early the next morning, Jacob blurted out his story to Joseph and Mary. They were not surprised by what he said. "I was visited by an angel in a dream," Joseph explained. "The angel warned me that I must flee to Egypt with Jesus and Mary." Jacob's eyes went wide with wonder. "We have much to do. Can you help us, Jacob?" Jacob nodded. That night, Jacob led Mary and her precious baby through the darkened streets of Bethlehem. If anyone knew how to slip in and out of shadows quietly, or how to find a hidden alley, it was Jacob. They didn't speak as they moved through the silent streets. Joseph was waiting for them outside the gates. He had taken the donkey and left the city earlier that day so no one would notice and try to follow them. A group of soldiers rode by just after sundown, whispered Joseph. Jacob and the little family hurried away from Bethlehem as quickly as possible. Jacob wanted to go with them to Egypt, but Joseph and Mary felt it was too dangerous. At a well, where the road split, Joseph talked to the head of a caravan that was traveling north. Jacob, you can go with these people, said Joseph when he returned. Mary and I think it is no longer safe for you in Herod's palace.
No longer safe?
We have family up north, and I've made arrangements to get you there. They'll take good care of you. Will you do something for me, Jacob? Asked Mary. Will you tell my family all that has happened? Will you tell them we will return to Nazareth when it's safe? Jacob agreed. He then took Jesus from Mary and kissed him goodbye. I never had a brother, he said. You have one now, Mary replied. There was sadness and happiness when they said goodbye, but deep inside where the truth of the one kingdom burned as bright as Jesus' star, Jacob knew that he would see his friends again. There was still another reason for Jacob's big smile as he rode atop the camel heading north. The words Mary and Joseph left him with echoed in his head. Remember everything you've seen and heard, Joseph told him, for the day will come when other people will rejoice to hear the story of Jesus and his birth. And listen carefully for God's voice in all that you do, said Mary. Sometimes he speaks through a star, sometimes through the songs of the angels, sometimes through the quiet tears of an old man, and sometimes his voice is the voice of a little boy.
Holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. On your knees, oh, hear the angel voices. Oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born. Oh, night divine, oh, night divine. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus raise we, let all within us praise his holy name. Christ is the Lord, then ever praise we his holy
Christmas Trolls by Jan Brett.
By who?
I'm Treva. And the day my brother Sammy and I went to our neighbor's farm to pick out a Christmas tree was the beginning of the most unforgettable Christmas I ever had. As we went home through the forest with a perfect tree packed on the sleigh, Tuffy started sniffing and barking. I couldn't see anything, but I felt sure someone was watching us. When we arrived home, we forgot all about the forest. Mom and Dad had brought out our boxes of ornaments to decorate the tree. Sammy and I put evergreen wreaths, mistletoe, and holly all around the house. We had already wrapped our presents and hidden them away for Christmas morning. Then some of our Christmas decorations started to disappear. I didn't notice until Dad asked if we had moved the trinket box he had hidden from Mom. I shivered because Mom had just asked me the same thing about the mittens she had knitted for Dad. Sammy and I looked in all the usual hiding places, but we couldn't find them. Tuffy was acting strange too. He sniffed and barked and ran around in circles as if he were looking for something. Then a few days before Christmas, the treetop angel was gone. What would be next? I started carrying my favorite red horse everywhere. Early the next morning, when I went out to feed Arnie, I saw something flying across the snow. It was our Christmas pudding. I harnessed Arnie, bells and all, and raced after it into the forest. As I got closer, I could see that our pudding was being carried along, pincushioned to the top of a hedgehog. I didn't know what to do, so I yelled, "Stop! Come back!" But it didn't stop until it reached the bottom of 4 fir trees. The hedgehog put the pudding down and scampered off. Just then, the tree started rocking back and forth. Suddenly, a funny-looking ladder dropped down from above, and 2 trolls scurried down, pouncing on the pudding before I could even move. They pulled it back and forth as they went up the ladder, squabbling all the way up to the top. I climbed up right after them and looked inside. There on the floor of the troll house were all of our Christmas things in a heap. The trolls were grabbing at them, each one wanting what the other one had. "Hey, trolls," I called. "Those are our Christmas things." The trolls dove onto the pile, clutching our gifts. "Mine," they clamored. "Mine, mine." I looked at them and had to smile. Their shirt tails were hanging out. Their pants were torn and patched. Their cheeks were bright red and their hair was standing straight up from all the pulling and tugging at each other. "Christmas," they wailed. "We want Christmas." "You want Christmas?" I asked, puzzled. "Yes," they shouted. "Give us Christmas." "Well, you can't just take Christmas," I said. The trolls looked surprised. They squeaked, they gulped, they shuffled their feet. "Want Christmas," they said, sounding miserable. "Okay, you can have Christmas, but first, what are your names?" "Mig," said one. "Tig," said the other. I looked around their messy hut. "Mig, Tig, let's begin by getting your house ready for Christmas." I started to straighten up and put things away. They began to help. "Nice," I said when we had finished. "Now, let's make your house look like Christmas." We went outside and gathered evergreens, berries, and pine cones. "Now we need a Christmas tree," I told them. "That's easy. You live in the trees, so you can have 4 trees instead of just 1 if you want to." "Christmas trees," they shouted, jumping up and down, and we decorated each of the trees that held up the troll house. Tig and Mig had a small setback on the way back to the hut. I knew I had some more explaining to do. "When I first got here, you were snatching things for yourselves and acting really grumpy. Try playing together and having some fun." "Fun?" they asked. I showed them how to jump rope. I told them how much I liked their tail knots and earrings. They smiled shyly and started tucking in their shirt tails. "Nice hair, pretty belts," they said, grinning at me, and they taught me a little troll dance. They were catching on. Now, if you really want Christmas, you must be generous with each other. If you do that, you will have Christmas right here in your troll house. The trolls cocked their heads and squinted. They were trying hard to understand. "How?" they pleaded. I felt my red horse in my pocket. I knew I had to show them, so I took it out and gave it to them. "This is for you." The trolls squealed and jumped up and down with glee. They took turns passing my horse back and forth, happily playing with it together. It was time for me to go home. I slipped out quietly and climbed down to Arnie. To my surprise, their hedgehog had packed all of our presents on the sleigh for me to take home while we were having Christmas in the troll house. On Christmas morning, Sammy and I ran downstairs to find our tree alight with candles and our stockings filled. We opened our presents in front of the fire, but this Christmas was full of surprises. I heard a bumping and a scratching noise. Tuffy barked. I listened and followed the sounds. Outside on the doorstep was a Christmas present. I unwrapped it and found a wild and wonderful troll horse. "Tig and Mig," I exclaimed. When I held it, I knew for sure that the trolls understood Christmas, and I knew that this was the best Christmas ever.